What started as a hard foul during a nationally televised WNBA game quickly turned into something much bigger. Deja Carrington was ejected after making heavy contact with Sophie Cunningham, and within minutes, the story moved from the basketball court to social media, where Carrington posted the words "white privilege" and tagged the Indiana Fever's official account. From there, the controversy exploded. Questions began surrounding Carrington's future, her relationship with Reebok, her public response, and whether this was simply one heated moment or another chapter in a pattern that had been building for years. The Reebok situation is a reported loss of her endorsement deal, so that distinction is important as we go through the story. The incident itself happened with just a couple of minutes left in the first quarter. Sophie Cunningham took off on a fast break, attacking the basket with Carrington chasing from behind. Instead of reaching directly for the ball, Carrington's arm came across Cunningham's head and neck with significant force. Cunningham was left bleeding around the mouth, yet somehow managed to finish the layup and convert the following free throw. That moment immediately changed the atmosphere inside the arena. The officials initially called the contact a common foul, but that decision did not last long. After reviewing the play, the call was upgraded to a flagrant-2. The explanation centered on the force of the contact, the wind-up and follow-through, and the fact that Cunningham was airborne and unable to protect herself. The replay made the contact look especially severe, and commentators immediately began debating whether this was an aggressive basketball play that went too far or something more reckless. Then something happened that made the moment even more uncomfortable. The Chicago crowd began showing support for Cunningham after Carrington was ejected. Instead of simply defending the home player, sections of the arena were reacting to the player who had just taken a hit. For a controversial foul, that was a powerful visual. It suggested that, at least in that building, many people watching the replay believed the contact had crossed a line. Indiana coach Stephanie White did not accuse Carrington of intentionally targeting Cunningham's neck. White acknowledged the foul was hard, but said she did not believe Carrington intentionally went for the neck. The league's pool report, as described in the source, supported the decision to eject Carrington, with referee Mike Forsberg explaining that the contact was unnecessary and excessive against a player who was vulnerable in the air. But the foul was only the beginning. The bigger controversy came after Carrington left the court. According to the source, she posted white privilege on Threads shortly after the ejection and tagged the Indiana Fever's official account. That single post transformed the basketball controversy into a national debate about race, accountability, social media, and the responsibilities that come with being a professional athlete. That timing became one of the biggest points of criticism. Carrington had just been ejected after a foul involving Cunningham, and then posted about white privilege while the game was still underway. Critics argued that the post appeared connected to the incident and suggested that Carrington was shifting the conversation away from the foul itself. Carrington later argued that people were making assumptions about what she meant, but the timing made a controversy almost impossible to separate from the ejection. Cunningham, meanwhile, gave a very different response. Rather than turning the incident into a larger confrontation, she said the situation had nothing to do with race and pointed out that she had previously been ejected for a similar type of foul. Her argument was simple. If the contact is excessive, the player should accept the consequences regardless of who committed the foul or who received it. That response became an important part of the story because Cunningham was a player who actually took the hit. She had every reason to be angry, yet her public reaction was comparatively calm. She said Carrington was not even involved with the team during the previous season and suggested that the Fever's national attention had created an environment where some players might be looking for attention. But why did this particular incident create such a huge reaction? Because people were not viewing it in isolation. The source points back to the 2024 playoffs, when Carrington was involved in another controversial incident with Caitlin Clark. During the Connecticut Sun and Indiana Fever playoff series, Carrington made contact with Clark's face while defending. Clark was left with a black eye, and the incident became one of the defining moments of that postseason. Carrington maintained that she was attempting to make a play on the ball, and that the contact was not intentional. The source also points to other controversial plays involving Carrington during the following season, including several flagrant fouls and physical incidents involving other players. One of the central arguments made by critics is that individual plays can be accidental, but repeated incidents naturally lead people to question whether there is a larger problem with the player's style of defense. That is where the debate gets complicated. Physical basketball is part of the sport. Defenders are expected to compete, fight through screens, challenge shots, and make difficult plays. But there's an important difference between playing aggressively and making unnecessary contact that creates a serious risk of injury. The league has to draw that line consistently, regardless of the player involved. And fans have every right to debate whether officials are applying that standard equally. Then the controversy moved from the WNBA to the business world. Carrington had a relationship with Reebok that was presented in the source as an important part of her off-court career. The deal reportedly began in 2025, and the source describes it as part of Reebok's broader basketball push. Her father had previously been associated with Reebok, while Carrington also had legitimate basketball accomplishments, including recognition as a most improved player and all-defensive first-team honors. According to the source, the Reebok partnership was intended to be much bigger than a one-time appearance. It connected Carrington to the company's basketball relaunch and its Engine A sneaker line. That meant the relationship was not simply about putting an athlete in an advertisement. It was about building a long-term connection between the player and the brand. And that is exactly why the social media controversy mattered so much. Professional athletes are not only judged by what happens between the lines. Sponsors are investing in personalities, public images, and audiences. When a player becomes the center of a viral controversy, the sponsor has to decide whether remaining associated with that athlete is worth the potential backlash. The source describes fans flooding Reebok's social pages and demanding that the company end its relationship with Carrington. The situation became even more complicated because Reebok's basketball division is associated with Shaquille O'Neal. Once the story reportedly reached the point where Carrington was criticizing O'Neal publicly, the controversy became a direct clash between an active WNBA player and one of basketball's most recognizable figures. Carrington pushed back against critics who questioned the meaning of her post. She argued that she had not explicitly said the foul itself was upgraded because Cunningham was white. She accused some commentators of making assumptions and defended her ability to discuss white privilege, pointing to her education and background as evidence that she understood the subject. But the criticism remained focused on one basic question. If the post was not about the foul, why was it made immediately after the ejection, and why was the Fever account tagged? That timing became the central issue. Critics believed the post connected the foul, the ejection, and the race discussion, even if Carrington later argued that the connection was being misunderstood. And this is where the story becomes less about one player and more about the culture surrounding the WNBA. The league has experienced an enormous increase in attention, particularly around Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Every controversial play involving Indiana receives additional scrutiny because millions of people are watching. That attention can be positive for the league, but it also means players have less room for error when incidents go viral. Carrington's critics argue that the biggest mistake was not necessarily the foul itself. They argue that the response afterward made everything worse. A hard foul can be reviewed, punished, discussed, and eventually forgotten. But when the player leaves the court and immediately posts something that sparks a completely separate controversy, the story keeps growing. The ejection becomes the first headline, the social media post becomes a second, and the sponsor situation becomes a third. That is why the Reebok angle became so important. If the company really did decide to end the relationship, the foul alone may not explain the decision. The larger issue would be the combination of the on-court incident, the viral reaction, the social media controversy, and the damage to the brand's association with the player. The source repeatedly presents the endorsement situation as a reported development, so viewers should treat it as such unless Reebok itself confirms the exact details. Then came the reported fallout with Shaquille O'Neal. Instead of simply accepting the situation and moving forward, Carrington continued the public argument. That decision brought even more attention to the controversy. When you criticize someone publicly, especially someone connected to the company that sponsors you, the consequences can become much larger than the original disagreement. And that is the lesson here. Social media can give athletes a voice, but it can also remove the distance between an emotional reaction and a permanent public record. A player can be frustrated for 30 seconds, post something, and then spend weeks explaining what they meant. Once millions of people have screenshot the post, the original context can become almost impossible to recover. Meanwhile, Cunningham's response created a completely different image. She did not deny that the foul was serious. She did not claim that she was being targeted because of her identity. Instead, she pointed to her own previous experience and said she deserved her own ejection when she committed a similar type of foul. That kind of response shifted the conversation back toward basketball and accountability. The most important question now is not whether Carrington should be hated or whether Cunningham should be treated like a hero. The real question is what standard the WNBA wants to establish for physical play, social media conduct, and sponsor relationships. If a foul is excessive, punish it. If a player violates league rules, enforce them. And if a sponsor decides that a public controversy no longer fits its brand, that is ultimately a business decision. The other major question is whether this incident should be viewed as a one-time mistake or as part of a larger pattern. The source makes a case for the latter by pointing to previous incidents involving Clark and other players. But intent still matters. Not every hard foul is intentional, and not every controversial defensive play proves that a player is trying to injure someone. That distinction should remain part of the discussion. What cannot be denied is that the incident became much bigger than a single basketball play. Carrington was ejected. Cunningham was left dealing with the physical aftermath. The social media post created a race-related controversy. Reebok became part of the story. Shaquille O'Neal was pulled into the argument. And suddenly a regular season WNBA game became a national conversation about sportsmanship, accountability, race, sponsorships, and the power of social media. And while all of that was happening, Indiana kept playing basketball. The source says the Fever won 90-86, with Caitlin Clark recording 26 points and 11 assists, Kelsey Mitchell scoring 27, and Aliyah Boston adding another double-double. In other words, while Chicago was dealing with controversy, Indiana was focused on the scoreboard. That may ultimately be the biggest takeaway. In professional sports, attention is valuable, but not all attention is good attention. A player can become famous because of incredible performances, championships, leadership, and consistency. But a player can also become famous because of one viral moment, one social media post, or one controversy that refuses to disappear. For Carrington, the next step is simple. Let the basketball do the talking. If she believes a foul was misunderstood, the best response is to play hard, play clean, and move forward. If she believes the criticism is unfair, she can answer it through a performance and professionalism. And if there are legitimate concerns about officiating or treatment across the league, those conversations deserve to happen with evidence and consistency rather than emotional reactions. For the WNBA, the responsibility is just as important. Protect the players. Apply the rules consistently. Make the standard clear. Whether the player is Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, Deja Carrington, or anyone else, the rules should not change depending on who is involved. And for sponsors like Reebok, the lesson is equally straightforward. Endorsements are built on more than talent. They are built on trust, reputation, and the understanding that both sides represent each other in public. When that relationship becomes too damaging, companies have to make difficult decisions. So was Deja Carrington wrong for the foul? The officials answer that question with a flagrant-two. Was a social media response handled well? That remains a matter of debate, but the timing clearly intensified the controversy. And did the entire situation contribute to the reported fallout with Reebok? According to the source, that is the story now surrounding her endorsement future, although the exact business details should be treated as reported rather than confirmed unless Reebok provides an official statement. One thing is certain, this story is no longer just about a foul. It is about what happens when an on-court decision collides with social media, sponsorship money, and the massive spotlight currently surrounding women's basketball. And once that spotlight is on you, every decision matters. So what do you think? Should Carrington face additional consequences beyond the flagrant-two ejection? Should sponsors consider an athlete's social media behavior when deciding whether to continue a partnership? And most importantly, should the WNBA take a stronger stance on dangerous contact regardless of which players are involved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more WNBA controversies, major stories, and basketball analysis.